Hey, what's going on there, guys? I'm back here today with another deck tech. So today we are taking a look at a modern deck, and it's white life gain aggro. Now, with this deck, we have a lot of ways of gaining back life with cards like Soul Warden, Soul's Attendant, and Martyr of Sands. And along with that, we have the aggro aspect of the deck, where we're playing cheap and effective creatures, where we can just flood the board with them. We have token producing spells, we can just flood the board with those. We make our creatures bigger with anthem effects and equipment. We just bash our opponent's face, and ultimately we are going to assure ourselves that we just don't lose because we have a huge amount of life off of all the life gain stuff that we have going on for us. So before we get started, before we take a look at this deck, if you guys have any suggestions for decks that you would like to see, please leave them down in the comments below and I'll take them into consideration for future deck techs. And also be sure to check out the playlists in the description where I have all the previous decks that I've covered on the channel, including a modern playlist and a budget deck playlist for you guys that want to play on a budget and don't want to spend a ton of money. So, starting off and taking a look at the creatures that we have in our deck, we have our most important card here being Serra Ascendant. This is going to be like one of the easiest ways to win the game whenever we have a huge amount of life. It's a 1/1 for 1 white with lifelink, which may not seem that amazing until we have 30 or more life, and then it gets +5/+5, making it a 6/6, and it also gains flying. So if our opponent doesn't have any means of blocking flying creatures, it's pretty much going to be game over pretty quick. But even if they do have some ways of chump blocking our flyers, we're still going to gain a huge amount of life back off the Serra Ascendant and its lifelink. We also have Soul Warden and Soul's Attendant, so both of them are pretty much the same creature, and I'm running a 4-2 split, so it's essentially like I'm running like 3 and 3 of each, but it's not really like the numbers matter. Soul Warden is a 1/1 for 1 white, and whenever any other creature comes into play, we gain 1 life. So this could mean our creatures or our opponent's creatures. And then I had the 2 Soul's Attendant, which are, again, 1/1 for 1 white creatures. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you may gain 1 life. So again, either our creatures or our opponents. So essentially 6 copies of 1/1 creatures for 1 white that are going to gain its life whenever another creature enters in. So these are pretty nice for us, especially with our token production spells that we have in the deck. It's going to allow us to gain back multiple triggers of the effect. We're going to gain back multiple instances of 1 life per turn, especially if our opponent's finding any means of playing creatures as well, which generally that's going to be the case up against a lot of the matchups. So they're nice for that. They're also nice for the Splinter Twin matchup if our opponent wants to go infinite creatures or anything like that. We're more equipped during game 2 to deal with Splinter Twin, but even still being able to kind of cancel out what they're trying to do with going infinite is pretty nice. We're just going to be gaining back a ton of life, and especially if we have multiple copies of the 1/1 for 1 white creatures, it's going to be nice for us to be able to gain back multiples of 1 life for each time they want to go into that combo. We also have Martyr of Sands being a 1/1 for 1 white, so just a ton of 1/1 for 1 white creatures here. But this is another really important card because it has an ability for 1 white, and we reveal X amount of white cards from our hand, sacrifice the Martyr of Sands, and we gain 3 times X life. So the more white cards that we have in our hand, the more we can reveal, and ultimately the more we can gain back, making it so that any of the really aggressive aggro decks, it's basically going to be like they're not really doing a whole lot. We're also going to be able to set up our Serra Ascendant pretty well and pretty quick. And one of my favorite cards to run alongside of the Martyr of Sands is Squadron Hawk. So Squadron Hawk is a 1/1 for 2 with flying, and whenever it enters the battlefield, we can search our library for up to 3 cards named Squadron Hawk, reveal them, and put them into our hand, and then we shuffle our library. So we play our Squadron Hawk, we can find 3 other copies, put them into our hand, and then we can crack the Martyr of Sands and just gain back a huge amount of life. So Squadron Hawk is awesome for that. That's kind of the biggest thing that I have him in here for. But also it's another evasion creature that can just bash in our opponent. And again, if they can't block flying, it's going to be a rough time for them. I have Ranger of Eos here as a 2-up, so 3/2 for 4, and whenever it enters the battlefield, whenever it comes into play, more specifically for what it actually says on the card. We can search our library for up to 2 creature cards with converted mana cost 1 or less, reveal them, put them into our hand, and then we shuffle our library. So Ranger of Eos is going to be one of the easiest ways that after we gain all of our life, after we have our life total set up really, really high, we can crack the Ranger of Eos, put him into play. We can search for cards like Serra Ascendant. So our 2 1-drop creatures can be just 2 Serra Ascendants, and then we are playing 6/6 for just 1 mana, which is really perfect for us. So Ranger is basically just to fetch Serra Ascendant after we have a ton of life, or things like Martyr of Sands if we need desperately to gain back life up against like any really aggressive aggro matchups. Then we have our creature production spells, our token production spells. So we have a playset of Lingering Souls, which is a sorcery for 3, and it puts out 2 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield. It also has a flashback for 1 generic and 1 black, which is one of the biggest reasons why I have a splash of black in this deck, for the main board and also a little bit for the sideboard as well. But with Lingering Souls, you really just get so much value out of having black in here as well. Even though it's a white life gain aggro deck, we do still have that little bit of the splash just to be able to flash back, and also for the sideboard as well. I have a playset of Spectral Procession, which is essentially going to cast for triple white for us. There's not really any instance where we're not going to be able to cast it for that. But we put 3 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield. So unlike Lingering Souls, it doesn't have a flashback, but it's going to produce 1 more token for us instead of having that flashback. So it's kind of like you kind of have to pick your poison there, whether you want to have the flashback there and spend more mana to use it twice, or whether you just want to just create 3 1/1s and not have the flashback. But ultimately, with both of them there, it's going to be great with our Soul Warden and our Soul's Attendant, where we just gain back 3 life for every copy that we have of either Soul Warden or Soul's Attendant. So it's great for that. We have a playset of Path to Exile. So it's an instant for 1 white. We exile target creature. Its controller can search their library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Then they shuffle their library. That's the only drawback to it. But Path just gets rid of things that are a nuisance for us. And anything that's going to give our opponent an advantage, we just want to get rid of it with Path. We also have our Anthem effect as Honor of the Pure, so we have a playset of it, and it's an enchantment for 2, and white creatures we control get +1/+1, so that makes any of the 1/1 flying spirits that we have 2/2s, and we're just going to be able to grind out our opponent a whole lot quicker, and it just makes any of our other creatures a little bit more rigid and tough to deal with. So Honor is really nice for us. And then our last spell that we have here is an equipment. So it's Sword of Light and Shadow, and it's a 2/of. It plays for 3, equips for 2, and the equipped creature gets +2/+2, has pro white and pro black. And whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, we gain 3 life, and we can return up to 1 target creature card from our graveyard to our hand. Now, the reason why I chose this is we do gain a little bit of life off of it, but being able to take a creature card from our grave and put it back into our hand is really nice, especially if our opponent uses a removal on something like Serra Ascendant, or we want to gain back something like Martyr of the Sands and be able to use it again. The Light and Shadow ends up just being really, really awesome for that. And it also gives us protection from things like Path to Exile and Dismember, so it's ultimately awesome for that as well. So I like the 2 swords in there. And then we have our lands. So for our lands, we have 22 of them. I have a playset of Godless Shrine as our only chalk land here. A playset of Isolated Chapel, and comes in to play tapped unless we control a plains or a swamp, which shouldn't be a problem for us. We have Marsh Flats, which is going to allow us to either search for Godless Shrine or just for our plains, depending on what we really need. If we already have black, we might as well just go for searching for plains and just thin our deck of more lands. That way we're drawing into other things more frequently than lands, so it's pretty nice for that. I have 1 Windbrisk Heights, so when it enters the battlefield tapped with Hideaway, we look at the top 4 cards. We can exile one of them face down, and the Windbrisk Heights taps for 1 white, but for 1 white mana and tap, it has a second ability where we can play the Exile card without paying its mana cost if we had 3 or more creatures attack in the turn. So off of things like Spectral Procession, Lingering Souls, and just any other creatures that we have that are swinging in and bashing our opponent, we can effectively get a free cast out of something based on what we had in the top 4 and what we choose to exile with the Heights. So ultimately we can just cast something for cheaper, like if it's casting like another Spectral Procession for just 1 white mana as opposed to casting it for 3 and having to top deck it or anything like that. So I only chose to have 1 Heights in there, but it is still pretty awesome with all the creatures that we have attacking. I have 1 Vault of the Archangel as well, so for 4 mana, it's going to allow us to give creatures that we control Death Touch and Lifelink, which is going to be nice up against the creature-heavy matchups where we can just make a ton of our 1/1s have Death Touch, so our opponent's going to be less likely to swing in and bash us. And the Lifelink is going to, again, be another easy means of gaining back a ton of life. And then we have our basics, so we just have 8 basic planes, giving us a total of 22 lands. So that's the main board that we have for this deck. Now let's switch over and take a look at what we have in the sideboard here. Alright, so for our sideboard here, the first card that we have is Kor Firewalker, being a 2/2 for double white. And the reason why I have Kor Firewalker is he's really good up against anything that is really red heavy, so red deck wins or any of the other variants that are close to it. Especially anything that has like a ton of creatures. If it's a more creature heavy red build, Kor Firewalker is just really amazing. He has protection from red, and whenever a player casts a red spell, we can gain 1 life. So if we're playing up against something like red deck wins, we can gain life off of every spell that they try to cast to deal damage to us or to get rid of our creatures. But ultimately, the Firewalker sticks around because of his pro red. Another card that I wanted in the sideboard because of pro red is Sword of Fire and Ice, and I actually wanted this over Sword of War and Peace just for the fact that whenever my equipped creature deals damage, I'm going to be able to draw a card. So it plays for 3, equips for 2 like all the other swords. Equipped creature gets +2/+2, pro red and pro blue. And whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, we get to deal 2 damage to target creature or player. So it doesn't really matter as much for us. We can get rid of small creatures, but we can also direct it to our opponent and just deal damage to our opponent. But the big thing was just drawing a card. Rather than gaining back life off of what we would be doing with the trigger off of Sword of War and Peace, I would actually much rather draw a card because we already have the means of gaining back a ton of life, so that's not an issue for us. We don't have to gain even more. But I do want to draw cards where we still have the pro red. The pro red's relevant for us, but drawing an extra card could mean playing another creature, playing another spell that could gain us back life, and ultimately just finding more things that we could do rather than gaining life, which is something we already are doing as the deck is progressing and working out each turn. I have 3 Revoke Existence for hate for various things. We can deal with stuff like Affinity, we deal with Birthing Pod and get rid of their Birthing Pod. Splinter Twin, we can get rid of Splinter Twin whenever it comes in and enchants a creature. But ultimately, it's just a 2-cost card that is going to allow us to exile target artifact or enchantment. It's especially nice up against Affinity if they have the means of regenerating up against any destroy artifact spells. So it was that over something like Divine Offering or anything else that would destroy an artifact or an enchantment based on what we could potentially play. So just having Exile was a little bit more convenient. I have 3 Brave the Elements, so this is for the matchups where our opponent's going to have targeted removal and means of targeting our creatures. For 1 white, we choose a color, and white creatures we control gain protection from the chosen color until the end of the turn. So, again, especially nice against the mono-colored matchups like red deck wins or anything equivalent of it, where we just get protection from that specific color that we need. But against like targeted removal, Brave the Elements is really nice. We can just essentially like counter it and make it so that the target is not valid anymore. So Brave the Elements is nice for that. All of our creatures are white, so that's a bonus for us. I have 2 Zealous Persecution, so it's an instant for 1 white and 1 black, and it's kind of like a mini overrun. It's a really small scale, but with the amount of creatures that we create, whenever we really want to be more aggressive in a matchup, we side in Zealous Persecution, and we can just start bashing in a lot more consistently, and the attacks that we're making are going to be a lot bigger and a lot more powerful. So until the end of the turn, creatures we control get +1/+1, and creatures our opponents control get -1/-1. So Zealous Persecution also deals with any of the matchups where our opponent has a ton of small creatures, and also up against Splinter Twin if they're going off with Pestermite. So we get rid of all their copies of Pestermite after they get done with making however many copies they want to make, like 1,000,000. So Persecution is nice for that. I also have 2 Rest in Peace for anything graveyard-based, anything that's trying to play off of their grave, Life from the Loam, anything like that. So Rest in Peace is nice for that. Dredge also. And then we have 2 Nevermore, so that's the last card in the sideboard. So whenever it comes up to just like a lot of different matchups, whether it's like control or combo, anything like that, Nevermore just allows us to name a non-land card, and the named card can't be cast. So it's especially nice up against decks that are still trying to play off of Grape Shot, anything like Storm-based, so it's nice for that. But that's our sideboard here, and that is white aggro life gain, or white life gain aggro for us. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the deck. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel for more Magic the Gathering content. The entire deck list is down below, where you guys can use it as a reference, as well as all the previous decks that I've covered in their respective playlists. So you guys can check that out. Check out the other modern decks that I've done on the channel, the other budget decks, and all the other decks just in general. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at @AdjumanCinejob. You guys can ask me questions or just keep up to date with what's going on the channel and what news I have to share with you guys. Until next time, have yourselves a wonderful, fun-filled Magic the Gathering day, guys.